David Bursty here with a new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Peter Green. I've had a lot of requests to feature the late great blues rock guitar legend and pioneer Peter Green, who unfortunately passed away back in 2020. And there's no question, his influence and importance in rock music, blues rock, hard rock, and metal can't be overstated or underestimated. I mean, definitely he's an essential chain in the link of, guitar history. And, a founding member of Fleetwood Mac in the late 60s, definitely a big pioneer and push with the blues rock music that came out of England in the late 60s. Also pioneered hard rock and metal riffing, with songs like the Green Manalishi, famously covered by Judas Priest. Also wrote Black Magic Woman, famously covered by Santana. So there's this, historic and very important legacy surrounding Peter Green. And this episode is going to reveal some of his rhythm work and chord ideas. But definitely, he's a shining star of the guitar. So aside from Peter's work with Fleetwood Mac and his own solo output, which he did release a lot of solo albums in his career, he also worked with an assortment of different bands, and he famously joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers right after Eric Clapton left. And, famously at that time in the late 60s, people were spray painting Clapton as God in public on walls and overpasses and whatever. But then after Peter Green joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers, people started to refer to him as the Green God, which signified he was every bit as good as Eric Clapton. But here's an image with some of the people that Peter Green worked with in his career. Another very important element within Peter Green's history as a musician is his Greeny Les Paul Standard that he had. The guitar that he used, back in the day with Fleetwood Mac. Eventually he sold it. It ended up in Gary Moore's possession, and Gary Moore used that guitar for many years. Gary eventually sold it. I think it ended up with a collector somewhere, and then eventually Kirk Hammett from Metallica bought the guitar. I think I read somewhere that Kirk paid less than $2 million for that guitar. That's an extremely expensive and very historic, Gibson Les Paul Standard. So the music and chord-based examples in this episode came from 5 different Fleetwood Mac albums or sources, and 3 of those sources are actual albums. And then 2 of them are actually singles that appear on compilations, or, they didn't actually appear on a full-fledged studio album they released. But that's something interesting about Fleetwood Mac's early output, is they released albums that had great music and songs, but then they continually released singles that became huge hits, and then they started putting those songs on their albums, kind of sticking them in there, because they were releasing music that wasn't necessarily on an album, but it was finding an audience. That's Albatross and the Green Manalishi. Technically, Oh Well, there's a whole bunch of early Fleetwood Mac that originally wasn't on an album, but they stuck it on a greatest hits or a compilation or whatever. So anyway, here we go. With the opening, that's Oh Well Part 1 from Then Play On, and that actually has 2 parts, and we actually featured that in the I Love 60s Chords episode that I put together a couple years ago. But here we're talking about Peter Green, so I had to feature that again. But Oh Well's like this. Mainly like single notes, it's just like a single note, busy, bluesy riff, but it's implied chords, and it's a lot of E throughout that. But this first riff, right? Really, there's a lot of syncopation, really rhythmically active riff. But you're really just kind of playing around with E, E5, E7 implied, some of that stuff. again. Then you start hearing this. So it's like an E octave and then an implied E minor 7 right there. Just kind of grabbing that D, G, and B on the D, G, and B strings right there on the 12th fret. That might actually be 2 guitars, but you can actually safely play that with just one. And this huge riff. Grabbing that flat 5 there, and then it's kind of like E minor blues right there. There's the flat 5 right there, and then grab that flat 5 again right there, that B flat. And the verse starts, and then you hear that riff come back. It technically starts with an acoustic guitar, and then you hear electric guitar doubled it, but I love Oh Well. That song just kicks ass. Okay, up next is My Heart Beat Like a Hammer, which came from the first Fleetwood Mac album, which is on the wall right there. It's the one with the trash cans and the dog. And if you're looking for an amazing blues rock album from the late 60s that you probably haven't heard before, that one will blow your mind. It's amazing. It's very bluesy, but it's so raw and just full of heart. It's awesome. But My Heart Beat Like a Hammer is something like this. There's 2 guitars, and the main guitar is playing this riff. Right? And then you're going to move to A. That's all in E. So slide into that B and D, that kind of passing chord, and then hammer on, that G to G sharp. It's a super bluesy riff right there. And it goes to the 4 chord, A, and you're going to do the same riff, but you're going to do it in A up here. Right? So you're sliding into this E and G, there's your passing chord, and then hammer on that C to C sharp, the minor to major third. Mimicking the same riff we did here, but now in the key of A. Go back to E. We're going to go to the 5 chord B, grab the root note, then you're going to do that same riff in B right here, just do the first half, then you're going to do the second half of A, like that. Go back to E and there's a turnaround. So we're coming down here. Right. And now that's the main guitar part. There's another guitar that's just doing like the boogie blues riff. Like that. And when you put those 2 guitars together, it's magic, like this. Next up's the song Long Grey Mare. This also came from the first Fleetwood Mac album, and it's this busy, bluesy picking riff, like this. So it starts with this, and this is really interesting. So he's basically grabbing this D and F sharp and he's bending it, and he's bending the G up to E and that F sharp, or I'm sorry, bending the D up to E and the F sharp up to G. So he's kind of doing that, but with a bend. Right? Something like that. So when you hear it, you might think it's that, but it's a bend. You can hear him bending the string. It's really crafty. And then this really common kind of, picking focused bluesy riff. Like that. So it's 1 and then 2, 4, and then 2. And then you're grabbing that A, C sharp, D, and E right there. Good picking workout if you're not used to doing riffs like that. Do the exact same thing now in D, the 4 chord. Go back to A. You're going to kind of move chromatically into that E right there. Back to D. And then do that chromatic move back to E. And then right there, just start banging on this E7. And then do the whole thing again. Up next is Rollin Man. This came from the album Mr. Wonderful, which was the second Fleetwood Mac album that had Peter Green. Great overlooked, blues rock record for sure. This is a really cool, kind of bluesy rock riff with implied chords once again. But Rollin Man's something like this. Like that. So it's a blues in A and an all implied chord. So that's starting with A7 right here, but you're hearing this riff. Right? So that A to G to E, grab this A right there, grab this B, and then C to C sharp, and also grab that E there on the B string. And you're kind of grabbing like an implied chord right there. Right? All A right there. Then it's going to shift to the 4 chord D or D7, and you're going to do modify the riff ever so slightly. Keep the A, G, and E action. Grab that A right there on the D string, and then C, C sharp to D to imply that D chord. Also grab this F sharp there for part of that D action. Go back to A. Then you hear him just plow through the riff. And then he's actually playing a little piece of E7 right there. So we're going to the 5 chord. So that's functioning as part of E7, even though it's just a little 2-note dyad. And then after the E, go back to A again. And then the verse starts right there. But what a cool, crafty, little sneaky, blues rock riff. I love stuff like that. And Peter Green excelled at riffs just like that. All right, next up's the instrumental classic Albatross. And this was actually another single that Fleetwood Mac released. It became a minor hit, and they stuck it on some compilations and stuff because it found an audience once again. But this is interesting, and it's an instrumental. It's actually influenced by Santo and Johnny's classic Sleepwalk. So it has that dreamy, melodic, guitar sound. But Albatross is something like this. Actually starts with this, like a single B note, and then you're hearing an A major triad, so like A over B right there. And then you're hearing it move to that. And that's basically like E major 7 right there, just barring the 4th fret on the G, B, and high E string with the low E open. You know, that's E major 7 right there, but like that. So that intro is interesting. A single root note, A major triad to E major 7, like that. Do it again. That's like the bass right there, kind of giving like that heartbeat, you know, bass line. And then you hear that real strong melody. Real melodic and dreamy, and it definitely has kind of a sleepwalk feel or vibe to it. But I love Albatross. I could listen to that for hours. Alright, last but not least is the Green Manalishi, and once again this was a single that Fleetwood Mac released. This is also like one of the last things Peter Green recorded or released with the band. But once again it was a single they released, and then it became kind of a hit, and they started putting out compilations and stuff like that. But the important thing here is, remember, this is from 1969. And listen to how heavy and, you know, impactful this riff is. And Judas Priest famously did a cover of this song. The Green Manalishi isn't a Priest tune, it's a Fleetwood Mac tune. And this is from the interlude of the song, but like this. Kind of like partial, like twisted power chords and stuff. Like right there, there's E minor kind of moving back, moving up to this like partial, you know, G, but you could also relate that to E minor. So these like little major and minor triads. You know, there's 1969 and he's thumping that low E. And all these little half-step movements and stuff, I mean, that's so unusual for 1969. Nobody was playing like that, you know, back then. I mean, obviously you had Moby Dick and you had, you know, Deep Purple and stuff, Zeppelin, and, you know, eventually Black Sabbath came out, but even Sabbath didn't have riffs like that. That's very intricate and dark and super heavy. Kind of a look, you know, at a glimpse into the future, I think, with music, because that definitely pioneered and influenced legions, you know, hundreds if not thousands of guitarists heard that, it perked their ears up, and then they started playing around with riffs like that too. Now, another area of Fleetwood Mac's early music that I haven't talked about yet was the fact that they usually had a second guitarist, and on this song Danny Kirwan actually played an additional guitar part along with Peter, and Peter was playing those lower chords. And I believe Danny was doing this part. Extension of those lower chords that Peter played, and then when you put those two parts together, it's magic. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Peter Green. Definitely a very important and necessary, you know, essential inspiration and pioneer of rock, blues rock, hard rock, and metal guitar. And there's just thousands and thousands of players. You know, Gary Moore was directly influenced by him, obviously Kirk Hammett. There's a whole bunch of players that just hopelessly love Peter Green and that early output from Fleetwood Mac. And his career started somewhere around 1961. And then not too long after he left Fleetwood Mac, he did release a solo album, but then he disappeared for about 8 or 9 years, and then returned to his career and noticeably looked a little bit differently and played, you know, a little bit differently. But I don't want to go into like his personal life, but it is really interesting what happened with him, and it's kind of one of those kind of tragic stories that actually turned into kind of a successful, you know, he returned to his music career and kind of returned to his audience and his fans. and returned to music. But he definitely struggled for a long time. And I don't want to go into that, but I would love to read a book about Peter Green because I've never really read, too deep into his life and his career. But what an inspiration, an interesting human being for sure. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.